Hey Vamps! Today we're going to be finishing off the House of Night series for good. We are going to be going over my final thoughts for the entire series, which means we're just going to be going over some stuff that didn't fit in concisely to the narrative I was trying to portray. We're going to go over some plot stuff, some writing stuff, themes, characters, and then just some final thoughts to round out the entire series, and then I'm going to be done with it. Let's get into it. First, we're going to talk about some plot stuff. As far as the overall plot of the series goes, I think that it started out okay. It wasn't anything phenomenal or anything like that, but who was expecting something phenomenal from a Twilight ripoff? We all thought it was going to be better than Twilight because of like the feminist implication. The cast obviously wanted to make us think we're in these books. However, these books were not feminist in the slightest. I think the plot, like, it started out in kind of a good place. Like, Zoey comes to the school and takes down Aphrodite, who's just this kind of mean girl. And it's a good place to start in a fantasy series. Like, you don't want to make the first threat too big, because then you don't get, like, the sense of progression as the series goes on, leading up to the big villain. There are a lot of good ideas that are introduced. The little twists on the vampire lore, like getting marked. Some good character stuff introduced as well. Like, the whole series leading up to the reveal that the big villain was Neferet, the high priestess of the school, would have been a really good idea. It was like, with a lot of these ideas, they wanted to get to the punchline quick because they couldn't believe that they'd come up with this really good idea. And as a result, we didn't get any of the natural build-up that we should have got before the big reveal. And so that big reveal then just fell flat, or it didn't have the emotional impact that the cast were hoping for. It didn't really, as readers, and I speak for us all here, okay? I don't care if you don't want me to speak for you. We as readers, we were just cheated out of a lot of like the emotional impact that these scenes should have had, because we did not have appropriate time spent with the build-up that would create that emotional impact. The cast always played their hands a little bit too early, and so the entire series and, you know, all of the characters in it, all of the themes that were explored, everything just felt a little bit too underdeveloped, and as a result, I didn't care. So the first thing that I want to address about this series is vampires are just witches. And what I mean by that is that they are a matriarchal society with magical powers closely associated with cats, shunned by regular patriarchal society. And also, oh, you know, the Salem witch trials, yeah, that was just vampires. People were just burning vampires at the stake. It wasn't this big conspiracy against, like, regular human women. It wasn't this thing that humanity could learn from. It was just humanity burning vampires, which, I mean, can we blame them if all vampires are like Zoey Redbird? Yeah, the Salem witch trials was apparently just humans going out and burning vampires, which is like, it's a whole new type of ism that we've created in the House of Night series, but I feel like that particular example takes away from the actual ism and the actual thing that we learned as a society from the Salem witch trials by having them actually be aimed at a mythical creature that is somewhat a danger to humans. I feel like we were probably a little bit justified in wanting to burn the vampires, I can't lie, whereas like wanting to burn, you know, just the women that didn't really fit in the town, that was a little bit discriminatory. Apart from vampires just having witch lore, any other cool mythological being or like group of women in this series also gets retroactively turned into vampires. So like Medusa and the rest of the Gorgons, I think, were all vampires. And they just got like this reputation for turning men to stone because they had like earth affinities or whatever. As well as that, as well as just stealing all of the interesting history and all of the good myths for themselves, vampires are also any cool or vaguely relevant celebrity that you can think of. Like, I'm pretty sure Jake Gyllenhaal is a vampire in these books. Everything about this just makes it really weird that the vampires are discriminated against, because how could anybody discriminate against Jake Gyllenhaal? I just don't get it. No, but it doesn't make sense, right? Because if every famous cool person in the world was a werewolf, right? I already want to be a werewolf, but I'd want to be a werewolf even more because, like, all of my idols would have been werewolves and it would be this cool thing to be a werewolf, right? But by stealing all of this lore, the cast have made it so that their own canon doesn't make sense, where the vampires are kind of ostracized in society because like literally anyone who's anyone is a vampire. They're not this secret society that humans only kind of know about, and they're kind of mysterious to them, and so that ignorance kind of breeds hatred and fear, right? It doesn't work like that because vampires are fucking everywhere and they all live in the House of Night down the fucking street, so it's not really a big deal. I've spent way too long. That is literally my first point and I've been going on for 10 minutes, girl. What the fuck? My second point, the cats. I really like the idea of vampires and cats being closely related, even though it is kind of stealing from the witch lore. I wanted the cats to play like an important role in this series. I wanted the cats to have some relevancy, but I really just can't think of a time when a cat played an important part, apart from when Neferet sacrificed Dragon's cat to do that one spell. But even then, she could have just killed a kid. Any of the important characters kind of get a cat just to have as an accessory, because all the main characters, right, have to have like a love interest, an affinity, and a cat as like their trio of things. Like they're a Bratz doll with a hat, a handbag, and some shoes. That's just the way it works. They have to have the cute little vampire accessories, and a cat is part of that. Something that really pissed me off about the cats was when all the kids get locked back in the House of Night because of the police investigation into Aphrodite's dad's murder. All of the red fledglings and Zoey and her circle have been living in the tunnels outside of the House of Night, and so the cats are there when they get put on lockdown at the House of Night. And Zoe's just like really chill about it. She's like, they'll be okay. The feeders have got enough food for a couple of days, but after that we'll probably have to make a fuss about going getting the cats. And I'm really sorry, but you would not see me, even if they did have an automatic feeder, like you would not see me leaving my cat alone for 2 days. Like I would be screaming and crying and demanding to at least make a phone call to my mother, because that is not fucking happening. For the cats being apparently so important to vampires and such helpful creatures to them, the cats do nothing, and Zoey doesn't seem to care about them very much. There are some interesting lore details introduced that aren't just stolen from like witchcraft lore, and that's stuff like marking. I think the idea of getting marks is a really interesting one, but if you think about the way that it works in this series for even a second, it all just kind of falls apart. I harken back to my first video about this because I hadn't even started explaining the plot yet, and I started to question what marking was all about. The first time I'd sat down and really like thought about it from like a scientific perspective or whatever. If, as PC Cast claims, becoming a vampire is a physiological change that happens in some human, what is the need for a tracker? The guy comes out to you and says something and holds out his hand, you get the mark on your forehead, right? But if it's a physiological change, then you were already gonna start to do that. So what is the point of the tracker? Just to tell you that you have to go to the House of Night? But vampires are well known, and the House of Night is well known in this world, so like anybody who was around would be like, oh shit, like this guy's turning into a vampire, we better get it to the House of Night. Like, it's the trackers, as much as it's like a cool idea, doesn't mesh well with the idea of a vampire being like biological, right? It just doesn't, the two things can't go together. Instead of like having one or the other, or trying to explain how the tracker works in this whole physiological dynamic, they just don't. They just have both, and they just think that we're not going to question that shit. My only conclusion is that a tracker, they kind of get informed in the way that they do, that they've got to go and mark this girl because she's about to start the change, and that's just so there's, you know, like a grown vampire around when you first start to make the change, because it makes you sick and stuff. So it's just kind of to make sure that you get to the House of Night, I guess. But in a lot of the examples that we see, the tracker just shows up and is like, you're a vampire now, bitch, and then fucking dips and we never see him again. So even that is like a flimsy kind of headcanon that I've come up with for myself. The other idea that I thought was interesting was the idea of the red vampires. So the vampires that we know throughout the series are like the blue vampires, as Zoey is. They're kind of the Cass version of vampires, which are like this witchcraft lore vampire hybrid. Not really affected by the sun, it's a little bit uncomfortable for them, but they don't like burn up in it. And, you know, garlic and crosses don't work on them and stuff like that. They're like new, edgy, cool vampires. The red vampires happen when a blue vampire fledgling dies and then is like resurrected. And I still don't exactly know how Neferet was resurrecting these children. I consider myself pretty intelligent, So if I've missed details in this fucking pathetic excuse for a book, I'm going to be really pissed off. But I don't think we ever get an explanation for, like, how she's resurrecting them. We do kind of get an explanation of, like, where they've come from. Apparently they used to exist, like, they were this old version of a vampire, and that's why, like, these red vampires, they, like, can't come into a home without being invited, and they can do all this, like, Dracula shit, like, make themselves one with the mist and shit like that. So they're kind of like the classic old version of vampires. We get, like, a hint that they were around before and kind of, like, maybe evolutioned out of existence, and Neferet has somehow found a way to start bringing them back. Interesting. It's a really good idea to, like, contrast your, like, new vampire with the old lore version of a vampire and to see how they differ. But again, nothing really gets done with them. Nothing gets done with them. Pretty much just the point of this entire section, really, is that stuff got introduced, nothing got done with it. Characters got introduced, nothing got done with them. Shekinah. Remember Shekinah? Remember how she was meant to be so big and powerful? Then Kalona come out the earth and just bitch slapped her out of the book. Here's something that'll fuck your day up. So, something that I didn't mention when going over the plot of the story is about Neferet and the Bulls. I did briefly mention the Bulls. In this universe, obviously, as in many universes, there is an eternal battle between good and evil, darkness and light. And these two sides are represented somewhat by these two spiritual bulls. I don't know why bulls, but that's what PC Cast chose, and we'll talk about why in a little bit, or why I think anyway. Essentially, the good guy bull is black, and the bad guy bull is white, and that's to kind of have this play on things that look pretty aren't always good, and things that look evil aren't always bad, I guess. It's meant to be deep, but it's really not. The bulls aren't really in it a lot. The reason that I even bring them up in this review is because I cannot simply let this series slide without telling you that Neferet fucks one of the bulls. Yeah, like, we don't get a scene of it or anything. I don't think we do, anyway. If we do, I've blocked it out of my mind entirely. But it's at least implied in one scene that she's about to fuck the bull. There is, like, conversations between Zoey and her friends, which are like, yeah, Neferet's fucking the bull. So, bestiality. And I bring this up, not even just because it's ridiculous and I needed you to know that it was in this YA book series about vampires, but because it's just a little bit concerning, to be honest, because I've read another of PC Cast's books, and I cannot remember what the name of this series was for the life of me. I borrowed it from a friend, and this woman wrote a fucking book, right? A fantasy of, like, a middle-aged woman gets sucked into this, like, ancient Greek-esque world that's still got soap. It swaps places with this alternate universe version of herself that's like a goddess or a queen or whatever. She's, like, betrothed to be married to this handsome guy. But the handsome guy in this story is a centaur. And listen, I don't think there's anything wrong with centaur romances, okay? I'm not racist. It's the facts. Okay, so the guy can, like, do this magic shaman shit to turn himself into a human form so that they can make love or whatever. Sometimes he just chooses not to do that. Like, I do specifically remember a scene where he gets her on his, like, horse back and, like, rides through the woods with her until she reaches orgasm. It's just weird that a character did sex stuff with a horse creature in 2 of her books, and it's weird that, like, the horses don't need to be in this book. Like, the horses in the stables don't need to be in the book. But PC Cast clearly likes horses. But does she like them too much? I'm scared. Take the horses away from PC Cast. I don't know. If I wrote a set of 2 book series, and in both of those book series, someone shagged a gorilla, would you not think that I wanted to shag a gorilla? I'm just saying. Last little plot, a detail. The Kalona and Nyx storyline, because I just don't care about it and I think Kalona's shit. So basically, it turned out, like, we all know Kalona got banished from Nyx's kingdom. Ugh, amazing. It's such a fucking stupid reason. I'm not even gonna tell you what the reason was, because you'll be mad. Because it's so shit. Essentially, he had, like, a Lucifer moment, right? And he got banished. He come down and he, like, fucked with a bunch of women against their will, made them give birth to some weird bird creatures, which was nice. Got trapped in the earth by the wise women. The vampire lore is that Nyx has a consort, a boyfriend basically, called Erebus. Like the big twist is that Kalona and Erebus are brothers, and the lore is wrong because Kalona and Nyx were actually lovers and Erebus was just Nyx's warrior. Like there was never anything between them. Erebus has been like portrayed as her lover all this time because Kalona got cast out, and so none of the legends had ever heard of him as like a good guy. So at the end, after he's R-worded a load of Cherokee women and tried to R-word Zoey, and definitely contributed in some major or minor path to like the corruption of Neferet, one of Nyx's high priestesses, okay? After all of this, Kalona decides that he's gonna be good. He fucks off all like 1,000 of his children, but doesn't fuck off the one good child who's Rephaim, Stevie Ray's boyfriend. And that means, oh, well, he's a good dad now because he didn't fuck off one of his non-problematic children. And after he decided to be a good dad, all that happened was he defended Dragon against darkness that one time. And everybody was just immediately like, oh, we can trust Kalona again, he's fine. He became the sword master of the school, and then when he died, he went essentially to heaven, and Nyx just forgave him. She just forgave him, bro. Oh my god. She forgives him like it was nothing. Like he hadn't been like down on earth, causing shit for years. I wouldn't even be that mad if we'd forgiven Neferet as well. But we'll talk about Neferet last, okay? Because I need to like keep like my shit together for a minute. I don't even know if any of that made sense, but I just needed to talk about it because this series has such an issue with redeeming bad men and doing nothing for the women who they have hurt. Like, in this series, if a woman... This is so premature that I've gone off on this, but oh well. In this series, if a woman is wronged by a man, it's her fucking fault. And she does not deserve redemption or forgiveness, and he 1,000% does, no questions asked. Okay? So, I'm gonna move on. I'm going to talk about the writing for a little bit, and I'm gonna try and calm down. So, the writing. One of the major issues with the writing is the recapping and the roll call. Not such a big issue at the beginning of the book, but as we get further out to the end and the ideas that the cast were having got more sparse and the details between those ideas fewer and further between. After every like significant plot point, smoke your fucking air, girl, get that incense out. It seemed like we had to go and tell the rest of the group what had just happened. And then we would go to a figure of authority and tell them what had happened. Someone else would come into it and we'd have to tell them what had happened. And every time we recap, we also have to have everybody in the room respond to it individually, okay? It's not like we just go into a room and we say, oh, we told Stevie Ray what had just happened. It's, we go into a room and Stevie Ray's there and I say all this shit that's just happened. Like, we go through it again and then Stevie Ray has to respond to it with her catchphrase or whatever. And then whoever Stevie Ray's with, they also have to all make a comment. And all of the guys that Zoey, who is telling her, is with, have to make a comment about it as well. Okay? And that's what I mean by roll call, is like, instead of just trying to get the recapping out of the way as quickly as possible, we then have to, like, name everyone who's in the room and have them make a little quip about what's been said. And it drags. And nothing that any of the characters have to say is insightful or helpful in any way. And it's shit. I've just had to go and get a book, right? Because I needed to show you. Because the next thing we're going to talk about is the R word thing. At the beginning of these books, the cast would use disparaging language, such as the R word. And they would use it very casually. It wouldn't just be bad characters who were using this word. Every character used it. And I understand that it was a popular word, I guess, in teen speak at the time. It's a word that a lot of people used to use. I can understand that PC Cast probably thought she was just being true to teen speak by writing it. Interesting to point out that other works from this period have not included this word because even though society has come to realise that this word is not nice and that it's offensive to people and that we shouldn't use it, even though people did use this word, it was still mostly used as an insult, okay? And people didn't want to put that disparaging language into their books. And it's interesting that the cast not only put it into their books, but put it into their books so casually. And later on in the series, the books try to become fucking woke. Not to sound like I'm putting down the leftist scum right now, but like, the wokeness in this book was not appreciated whatsoever. It's not South Park woke, okay? It's J.K. Rowling woke. In one of the later books, I think it's Aphrodite, uses the R word, and Stevie Ray turns around and she says, that's a really offensive term and you shouldn't say it. Modern society deems it unfit for polite conversation and you should visit theourword.org and get yourself educated. It was very preachy, especially because I specifically remembered that Stevie Ray herself used the R word in the second book. At first, when I first saw them using this word in the first book, it was mostly Aphrodite using it basically, and I was like, oh, okay. It's just going to be the villains who are using this disparaging language and maybe they'll learn a lesson about it in the future. But no, very clearly see that, Stevie Ray is not completely guilt-free here, and it kind of shocked me a little bit because Stevie Ray was portrayed as this really sweet character who wouldn't say disparaging things like that, and so it just speaks even more to the fact that the cast clearly didn't see anything wrong with this word in the first place. Whereas, like, anybody, even the people who were using it would freely admit, yes, it is an offensive term. The pacing of this story is very off. I think this is probably to do with the fact that the casts would come up with ideas and then, couldn't wait to get to those ideas and so rushed into it. So those parts feel very rushed. And then the parts in between that and the next big idea that they come up with feel extremely draggy. Because, like I said before, it's just a bunch of recapping and roll call and nothing of much substance. I wouldn't mind if there was, like, character development happening in between these scenes. The characters actually are so stagnant. A lot to do with, like, this show versus tell mentality that the cast have got. Like, they'll tell us that the characters have been through so much and they've changed, but all we've seen them do is sit around for a lot of the book, cast one circle, which they've done a million times. Their attitudes and, like, the way that they continue to go about their day and make choices doesn't change, but, like, according to the writing, it has, and we're just supposed to believe that. A perfect example of this is, like, Zoey kills those two guys at the beginning, right, and she's not arsed. And then at the end of the book, she thinks she's killed those other two guys, and she's like, oh no, woe is me, that was so out of character. And it's like, we know from reading the books that it's not out of character and that Zoey is this overdramatic, angry girl who, like, uses her powers to manipulate people. One of the worst parts about the writing is the story timeline versus the real life timeline. The course of the story takes place over, like, maybe a year, something like that. So the first book came out in, like, 2007, I think. Obviously, the books are coming out a couple of years. The references and stuff in the books are referencing things that only come out in the years following 2008. I'm reading a story that's set in the year 2007, and they're referencing, like, I don't fucking know what happened after 2007, like, Game of Thrones. Is that relevant? They're making, like, pop culture references to things that are happening in the future of their timeline because they're releasing the books as if the stories are happening in that year, but it just doesn't make sense. That is so ridiculous that this was allowed to happen, that they were allowed to make these references and nobody was like, isn't it supposed to be fucking 2007? Like, that nobody thought that anybody would notice, that they think we're that thick. Like, it feels insulting to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just taking this way too personally at this point. Maybe I just need to calm the fuck down. But I don't want to. I don't want to calm down. I'm raging. I'm just generally raging, and this book's getting it today, as well as, like, the general timeline of the whole fucking book not making sense, which is nice. PC cast, she also forgets, like, Zoe's class schedule, so, like, the order of her classes doesn't stay the same. Sometimes Cass will say it's a Friday, 2 days will pass in the timeline, and she will say it's a Wednesday, and I'm like, just doesn't make any sense. It's just bad. There's just no excuses for that, really, is there? It's just fucking disgraceful. Other continuity problems are stuff like the gang will discover a weapon or an ability that would be perfect to use in a future situation that comes up, but because the cast are writing these books on the fly, they have completely forgotten about this previous weapon that they have used, and so the gang have to come up with something new to do, even though they have the perfect weapon or ability on hand. My favourite example of this is when Grandma uses the turquoise to deflect the darkness. It literally cannot feed on her because she is covered from head to foot in turquoise. And you would think after this point that everybody would be armour plated in turquoise, but nobody brings it up again, and nobody does that. Pretty much everything I've said in this writing section just speaks to how shoddily this thing was put together, and like how little care went into it and how little respect for the readers that they had. At least that's my opinion. Maybe they're just writing mindless content and they don't care about that kind of thing. You know, they're here for the weird sexy scenes, okay? That's fine. Whatever. But just it's not fine. I'm about to speed run the themes, okay? Because I don't want to get into a deep and philosophical discussion about the themes in the House of Night series, okay? Because it's not deserving of that. Religion and spirituality, most frequently represented through the rivalry between the people of faith, which is this universe's version of Christianity, and the House of Night, who are vampires who worship this goddess called Nyx, who very clearly and empirically exists within the universe. The people of faith are portrayed as just like bad people, like, and it just, this thing comes across as where it's like, oh, all religious people are bad people because they've got these old archaic beliefs that don't fit into modern society. That's just blatantly untrue. And they do try to address this, you know, in a deeper manner, and like try and capture upon the ways that religion can be good, and that like not all sectors of religion are bad, etc, etc. But because every person in the people of faith is an arsehole, it does just kind of like breed this idea that there's a certain group of people who are the bad guys. As we all know, it works on an individual basis, but not like all of like a religion, right? What? In what case do we think all of a whole religion is bad? Oh my god. The big theme of this book, supposedly, is always love, which, first of all, such like a play on Harry Potter is unreal. But I refuse to see how Zoey and her friends represent the phrase always love in any way. They probably try and shoehorn it down your throat like, oh, as long as we have love, we can do anything, and blah, blah, blah. But Zoe's such a fucking hateful bitch, and we'll get into that later, trust me, but she's such a hateful bitch. She could not embody love for anyone. At least in Harry Potter, the theme of like bringing love into it, like Dumbledore being like, oh, love conquers all, it's not random, because literally like Lily's love for her son saved his life from this apparently undefeatable curse, okay? So it's literally the strongest magic that they have in that universe. In this universe, I'm pretty sure the strongest magic they have is just Zoey. The Feminism of the House of Night series. Are you ready? I don't even know how to even start on this subject, okay? Like, it's a whole mess. They present the book like it is this big feminist thing, like the Vampire Society is matriarchal, so the girls are in charge, and that's like feminist and shit. Just because we've like reversed the gender roles, which actually they haven't reversed the gender roles, I'll just let you in on that little secret right now, but just reversing gender roles, that's not feminism. You just even look at, and I don't want to be that guy who talks about definitions, I do absolutely want to be that guy, okay? Grammar, most wonderful thing in life, okay? Me and Aunt Josephine, we both know that. Even if you just look up the simple definition of feminism, it's talking about equality of the sexes, okay? It's not talking about one being over the other or more important or whatever. It's talking about equality. I refuse to see how putting us in this society where men are just relegated to the role of warrior and women get to be the smart and powerful ones, you know, where you just go and run around with your little sword and flex your big muscles and look cute. That's not like a feminist society. They really think they did something, I don't know, with putting men down and making women be the ones who get like affinities and stuff like that. Like, it's just bleh. Let's talk about Aphrodite. Please. In the beginning of this series, okay, in fact, not even at the beginning of the series, throughout this entire series, okay, Aphrodite is treated like she is, what are the girls in the series call her a hoe. We don't see Aphrodite with many guys throughout this series, okay? We see her trying to get Eric back in the beginning, and then she's not involved with anyone until she meets Darius later on in the series. Those two are in like a monogamous relationship until the end. Even throughout this entire monogamous relationship, they call Aphrodite a hoe. And the situations in which they call Aphrodite a hoe is when she is outspoken about her sexuality, even if it is in a monogamous context, okay? So Aphrodite isn't a hoe because she's with a lot of guys, because Zoe's with a lot of guys, and at the same time, and she's not a hoe. But societally, to be a hoe, usually it's like to have multiple sexual partners, and especially to have multiple sexual partners at the same time. That's definitely societally hoish behavior, okay? So the only difference I can see between Aphrodite and Zoe is that Zoe is keeping her hoish behavior to herself, and Aphrodite is being outspoken about her sexuality and her sexual escapades and whatnot. So that's what makes Aphrodite a hoe. Aphrodite used to be a villain, and that's why we kind of see her like trying to perform oral sex on Eric, because that's the type of thing that evil girls do, okay, is they use their sexuality and their feminine wiles to get the men to do what they want, right? Aphrodite becomes a good guy, and she finds this guy Darius, and she enters into this monogamous relationship, okay? And then on the other side, we have Erin. She's not monogamous with anybody, really, before she switches sides when she's on the good side. She dates a couple of dudes, I think, but not very seriously. Apparently she has very high standards. Immediately after Erin becomes a bad guy, she has this completely out of pocket, like a nasty, like sex scene with one of the red vampire guys in a fountain. It's really strange. I'm pretty sure she like takes off all the clothes apart from like some really expensive like cowboy boots or something. Like, it's really weird. The only reason I can think of for this is we're showcasing that Erin is evil now because she has like like kinky sexual escapades outside, and like she's displaying this hoish behavior now because she's evil, because hoes are evil. I know a few men who would agree with that statement, to be fair, but I don't think that like promiscuous behavior is limited to evil people. Most accurately represented in Zoe, who, like I said before, has many sexual partners at the same time, and those sexual partners don't know about each other, so it's just mean behaviour, not nice behaviour anyway. So if anyone's deserving of getting called any names, it's Zoe. But, it's Aphrodite who's the hoe, and later it's Erin who's the hoe, just because she's more outspoken about her sexuality now, okay? Okay. Neferet, who, like, eventually ends up floating around the place naked because, to be a woman and to be comfortable with your body and to express yourself sexually and to use your sexuality for anything. It's all just wrong. You're a bad person. You're evil. And, Neferet often uses her sexuality to, seduce men into doing what she wants, or like trapping them into letting her suck their blood or whatever. See that, women being sexual just in general is just a really bad thing, and you shouldn't do it. Really feminist, guys. Really, really feminist. I am moving on to redeeming, trigger warning, the rapists, okay? That's the only word for it, because that's what happens in the book, okay? So I'm gonna break it down for you really quick. Stark, who is Zoe's warrior, but before that he was an evil red vampire who was mind-controlling girls into sleeping with him. Physically see him doing this, and like Zoe has to step in and stop him. Over the course of the series, we see that he has changed and he's not going to do anything like that again. He receives forgiveness before this, okay? Like, Zoe just spends a night in bed with him, and then he's like, I want to be a warrior. And she's like, yeah, dude, I can see that you're a good guy. And when she literally caught him, like, trying to R-word this girl, I'm not going to say it again, just trying to R-word this girl the day before. You know what I mean? It's... So we have Stark there, who admittedly did go on to be a good guy, and was only doing the bad things because his humanity had been taken away from him. So I can see if maybe the cast wanted that shock value, maybe I can understand why they made this decision. Wasn't a good decision, but I can understand why it would be made. However, it's not the only example, okay? It's a fucking theme, bro, okay? Let me tell you. the biggest, oh my god, Kalona. Like, oh yeah, a couple of students. Stark, I've got a tribe of Cherokee women under my belt. Do you know what I mean? Kalona gets forgiven because he's been punished enough by being sent down to Earth and then trapped in a cave for a couple of thousand of years. But disagree strongly, I'm not gonna lie. Heath? As much as I have said that, like, every guy in this series is a knobhead apart from Heath, I did kind of overlook the fact that Zoey and Heath wouldn't have a relationship if they weren't imprinted, right? And the only reason they're imprinted is because Heath knows that Zoey gets bloodlust and he keeps using that to continue the relationship. So he, like, keeps, like, cutting himself so that she can't resist him. Still manipulative, but it's the fact that it makes Zoey, like, act sexually. And normally she doesn't want to, but when she's having the bloodlust, she kind of can't control it. So it's almost like Heath's kind of like tricking her into doing sex stuff with him. So even Heath. Then even when he comes back as Aurochs, I'm pretty sure Aurochs cuts himself and Zoe's like, ooh. The crime for me, the thing that I'm like, get PC cast to a jail cell immediately is like, we've forgiven all of the bad men who've done the bad thing. Okay. And then, so the reason that Neferet is evil is because her dad R-worded her when she was younger. It psychologically messed her up a little bit, and she never got the healing that she needed from that. And I've talked about how they deal with healing in this series before, like they just summon spirit and ignore their feelings of grief and shit like that, and it's just not healthy. So they've obviously gone to try to do that to Neferet, and she very strongly and very bravely has held on to her feelings of anger and upset at having her father do that to her. Neferet, like, is the villain of the series, and she gets defeated at the end. She doesn't get forgiven. Admittedly, she doesn't ask for forgiveness, but why the fuck should she at this point? Literally, on the other side is a guy who's done that to the women. So why the fuck would she want to be on that side? There's this horrible, horrible scene. TW right now, okay? There's Seer Stone that Zoey has, turns into a mirror, I don't know. And she turns it on Neferet. And the mirror shows Neferet as a young girl, obviously showing Neferet after this assault. That's some fucked up shit right there, bro. What? Imagine redeeming a bad man, R-word bad man, in this series, and having the victim of that crime not only be the villain, but like to use the fact that that has happened to her against her, to like defeat her, to weaken her, to like basically trigger her into a PTSD response, bringing up the biggest trauma of her life, bro. And they just think, yeah, we fucking did one over on Neferet there, you know. What? I said I was going to speedrun the themes, and I've, like, completely not done that, but I got really carried away with the feminism and the fucking misogyny. Right, I'll calm down a little bit, and I will talk a little bit about that later when we get into Neferet's character and stuff. Let's talk about some characters. Let's talk about Zoey. Everybody else in this series wants to talk about Zoey all the time, so we may as well talk about Zoey a little bit. Zoey is a fucking Mary Sue. I never thought that a Mary Sue could be so unlikable. I just thought that they were boring. Even though Zoey is so fucking awful, no one in the universe seems to be capable of acknowledging that, apart from Neferet. Also Aphrodite, because Aphrodite knew that Zoey was a fucking annoying bitch as well. It's the contrast between everybody in the world telling her that she's so fucking perfect and the context of her being a fucking nasty, bitchy murderer who like uses her powers to like push her friends around and like bully them, and is just as much of a bitch as any of the girls that she says is a bitch throughout the series. Another thing that I really don't like about her is how she always talks about how like nerdy she is. And it's really, I'm not like other girls. She literally likes Star Wars, I'm pretty sure, and Harry Potter. like, you know, like every other person on the face of the earth, and she thinks that makes her this proper dweeby girl who like doesn't fit in and is so quirky, and it makes me upset. Also, the slut shaming doesn't help, but like we've already discussed this quite in depth, but just the fact that she goes around like any other girl who comes near her, she's like fucking slut, and it's like you literally shagging 3 men right now as we speak, as we sit here, Zoe. They're in you. Well, we'll talk about Damien. He gets to be the smart one. It just makes me laugh. Like it goes against what they're trying to say, because Damien's like naturally smart, you know, like a man is supposed to be, and then all the women have to rely on Nyx giving them direct information because they're all incapable of like studying. Like none of the girls are good students. Let's talk about grandma real quick and the mythic native trope. I wasn't really aware of this trope before reading this book. I kind of came across it when I was doing a little bit of research, which means I was just reading other reviews of this book. This whole like racist narrative of like especially like Native American people being like, I guess like magical girls or some shit. I don't know. It's really strange. Like there are like a lot of spiritual peoples out there, but for some reason these people who are like indigenous to America are like supposed to be in touch with like the spirit world or whatever. And like grandma perfectly fits into this trope, right? Because even though grandma's not a vampire, she is magic. Like the turquoise armor works, and she like does spells and shit. So I don't like, when you think about it in that context, it is really weird. But obviously, me not knowing about this trope and just reading a YA series, I thought, oh, like cool magical grandma. That's a pretty like boss ass feminist move. But now I see that even the things that I liked about the series are not good. Regardless of any like narratives that this part of the story might be trying to spin. Not grandma herself, but Zoey, about the Cherokee stuff. Very fucking annoying. She reminds us that she's Cherokee like every 5 minutes. Like, I guess the cast kind of appropriate Cherokee culture and mix it with pagan shit, which is not good. And I don't even know if the legend of Kalona is actually a Cherokee legend. Know that I will never forget the word Uwetsiagea, if that's how you even pronounce it. That's the way that they tell you to say it in the book, which is, you know, the Cherokee word for daughter. I'll never forget that for all my life, because they probably say it about fucking 200 times throughout the entire series, maybe more. Oh, we're nearly finished. Right, we're nearly finished, and I'm going to talk about 2 of my favourites characters from the series, or 2 of the characters that I was most excited to talk about. The first one of those is Becca. Who the fuck is Becca, I hear you ask me, because I've not mentioned Becca at all once during these reviews, okay? Or maybe I might have done actually once, but pretend I didn't say that that one time. Becca is another student at the House of Night who has some appearances throughout the series. I wouldn't necessarily say she's not a secondary character. She's not even necessarily a tertiary character. She's like a background character who steps in for some selective and particular scenes throughout the series when Zoey is in need of some romantic rivalry. Okay? Obviously, in the first book, Aphrodite is the romantic rivalry, but then when Aphrodite kind of becomes Zoe's friend, we needed somebody else. And Becca was a background character who had made some comments about how attractive Eric was. And so whenever there was tension between Eric and Zoey, Becca would kind of appear to, you know, make a comment about Eric's appearance, or maybe, I think when Eric and Zoey broke up, she was there, like, flirting with him. And Zoe's there, like, all slut-shaming her in her mind and stuff, and it's like, the girl is flirting with a single man. She's loud. From that moment on, like, Zoey just hated Becca, you know, for just being a girl in the vicinity of any man whom Zoey might want to one day have sex with. Remember I mentioned that Stark was trying to assault some girl and Zoey had to step in and stop it? That girl was Becca, okay? And Zoey, like, almost blames Becca for what was happening just because she doesn't like her, and she's like, oh, well, she was probably asking for it, basically, which is, I mean, heavy. Zoey goes on to, like, forgive Stark and everything, and Stark doesn't really, like, apologise to Becca, and We don't ever really see Zoey feeling sorry that she thought those things about Becca and like admitting that she only thought them out of jealousy. I feel sorry for Becca, okay? Because like she says some stuff about Kalona and Zoey's like, oh, she's a dickhead because she thinks Kalona's sexy, and it's like, Zoey, you think Kalona's sexy. You have the same taste in men, okay? Because Becca then goes on to flirt with Aurochs as well. Zoey has a go at her for that. Becca literally was getting like assaulted by Stark and like crying. She's literally a victim, and all that she has gone on to do in the series is be like this romantic rival to Zoey. Like I would have loved for them to have become friends or something. Like that would have been a good place for it to go. Like just this background character she had all this thingy with, but who had this traumatic thing happen, and Zoey stepped in because it was the right thing to do. And from that, like a friendship grows, okay? And Zoey comes to understand that the way she's been thinking about this girl isn't very fucking feminist, okay? Like it's supposed to be. But no, we don't get that. Becca just continues in this line. Because of this, you know, Zoey thinking that she deserved it when Stark assaulted her kind of becomes true. Like it's not true, but because of the way that the story goes, that's kind of seems like it's what it's implying, okay? Justice for Becca. She deserved better. Finally, I'm going to talk about Neferet, okay? A setup for a really good villain, okay? She's like powerful, she's in a position of power, okay? She's sneaky, she's already got a plan underway when our protagonist arrives, okay? So she's a legitimate threat. She goes on to do absolutely nothing with this. She kills a church full of people at the end, but that's when she's kind of become like a badass, and it's literally in like the second to last book at the end, so it barely even counts. She's gone absolutely bonkers, by the way. But like, her being insane was fun because it was her actually doing something. Because of all that crazy shit, I started to like her. And then obviously she had all the sympathy from hearing her backstory in Nefert's curse. And then as well as that, like, just from like a normal human perspective, just the way that she was treated within the narrative, like I said, all of the bad men in the book got forgiven. And yet the one woman who surely should be worthy of redemption, right? Because she did start out as a victim. Like, she gets, like, vilified because she refused to, like, lay down and let her abuser get away with what he did. And I just think that's fucking heavy. I think that's heavy as fuck, bro. And that's why, for my conclusion, I would like to advise you never to read the House of Night series, because as much as it might sound like I've been involved with this, and as much as I might say I like characters and things like that, it's almost like an out-of-body third-party experience reading these books, right? Because I'm not experiencing the story as the casts want me to experience it, okay? I'm experiencing the story as someone watching these authors do terrible things to characters who don't deserve it, and put the characters who are fucking awful on a pedestal. And so the way that I'm supposed to feel about the characters is completely reversed, right? So I like Aphrodite, even though she's meant to be the bitchy one, because she's the only one who's fucking got any ounce of realness to her. I feel sorry for her when the cast make her say, like, racist or fucking homophobic things, because that's not really in keeping with her character, and the cast just want her to say that because they want her to be outrageous. I blame them for that, not Aphrodite. And I like Eric, even though he's so fucking boring, but over the course of the series he became so underdeveloped that he ended up as arm candy to spur characters who needed a love interest at the end. From this like stand-up guy who was such a big part of the group to arm candy, okay? It's weird. It is a weird, like I said, third-party experience to read this series. And I do you know, I'll not be doing it again. Terrible, 0 out of 10, would not recommend. Don't even go there, sis. That's it. That's it.